Hey everybody, one of the loose ends we need to tie up from before school was released is the argumentative essay. So, what we had done up until this point is we had written one kind of together as a class. We did the whole brainstorm. We talked about the different parts of it that need to appear in an argumentative essay. And you started writing it. So we should have written at least 3 to 4 paragraphs of that. So we were pretty close to being done with it. And so that was just kind of intended to be practice. And then the follow up to that is having you guys write your own argumentative essay. And so the way in which you'll do that in modules, there are 8 different possibilities of kind of topics that you could write about. So you can pick any one of those topics and write an argumentative essay about it using one of the 3 perspectives that are given there, or you can come up with your own that's some kind of mix or different from all of them. And so, what I wanted to do today is just talk about the different parts and kind of the structure and format of what we're looking for here. I would suggest that you um, make the brainstorm chart for each of the different perspectives. And again, kind of like we talked about, the perspective that you have the most information in is probably one that you feel strongest about. Not for certain, but there's a good possibility that that's the one that you would be best at arguing in favor of. And so by doing that, you can kind of see what you already know about it. And on the flip side, it also gives you some of the opposing perspectives. So that's really one of the keys when we talked about this. When you're doing an argumentative essay, we recognize that people can disagree about things. It doesn't mean anybody's wrong necessarily or stupid. It just means that what I believe about this is kind of what tends to lead me this way, and what you believe about that maybe leads you to believe something else. So, um, you know, we will acknowledge that those opposing perspectives maybe have some merit. In fact, they most likely do. There's a reason why people believe what they do. But ultimately, we want to argue that our perspective is the one that's most correct. So, at its base, every essay is going to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And we kind of wrote about this, or we talked about this having a 5 paragraph structure. Because you already know how to do a 5 paragraph essay. Now, that doesn't mean that you are constrained to only write. Oh, sorry about that, buddy. That doesn't mean you're constrained to only writing 5 paragraphs. If you need more, you certainly should. If you need an extra paragraph or 2 or 3 or 10, whatever it takes to make your argument is totally fine by me. So the beginning, of course, is the introduction. And just as a side note, a paragraph is a minimum of 4 sentences, and really we're looking for about 5 to 7 sentences per paragraph. So we have a fully fleshed out, well thought out, functional paragraph there. So we start out with our introduction. Our first paragraph is going to be the introduction, and this should contain a hook. And we talked about the hook. The idea is literally like getting your reader on a hook, just like a fish. We want people to be interested in our topic. We want them to care about it. We want them to continue reading. Ultimately, that's our goal. We don't want to bore anybody. So first of all, we need some sort of a hook to get them into it. Some of the things we talked about that you can do: you can have the startling statement. You could tell some sort of story that leads into it. We talked about using potentially a quote. Be careful with that. Depending on who you talk to, some people say it's a great way to start these off. Some people say never start with a quote. I don't necessarily believe either one of those absolutes is correct. I think there are times you can start with a quote and it works just fine. But the quote should fit and be so darn good that it's just perfect for the essay. Don't try to force a quote that just doesn't fit with it. Another thing people often ask is, can you ask questions to hook people in? And I'm okay with it. Make sure you're only asking one question. No one wants to read the barrage of machine gun questions. Do you think this? What about this? What about that? What about this? Nobody wants to do that. But if you have one really solid question, I think that's okay. Again, some people say questions are a great way to start an essay. Other people say that you should never do that. And again, I don't think either one of those absolutes is necessarily correct. But it should be the right situation. It should be the right question. So that's our hook. We really want to draw people into the essay. We want to do something to make them want to continue reading. And you can also think about things that you've read that have really drawn you in. And we can certainly mimic some of that. Ultimately, then, in our introduction, we want to have a thesis statement. And this is a statement that kind of tells what this essay is about. So it should be your argument, the gist, the core of your argument, what you're trying to argue here. With intelligent machines, if you think that they have broadened our horizons and opened the doors to wonderful new things, which is certainly a valid opinion, then that's what your thesis statement should say. If you think that it has created a society of people who have their noses in their phones and don't know how to interact with normal people anymore, then that's what you should say for your thesis statement. And that, again, that was the practice essay we did, which was about intelligent machines and how they've affected us. So that's your introduction, and that should be, 4 to 7 sentences. We're looking really for 5 to 7. Then our body is going to be 3 paragraphs, and the way I would like you to structure this, your first body paragraph, we should talk about the opposing perspective, one of the opposing ideas. And we want to be fair when we argue that. We don't want to leave out good points that they make. Reasonable people can disagree about things as long as everybody's being reasonable. And so on the topic of intelligent machines, all 3 of those perspectives certainly had legitimate points that people could argue, and some people might feel more strongly about one than the other. But ultimately, we do need to take into account the opposing perspective. And one of the reasons for that is, number one, if someone's thinking some of the things that the opposing perspective would be saying and you don't mention them, it looks like you're deliberately trying to cover it up and just kind of hiding from that truth. And so what we want to do is we want to acknowledge that the opposition has some good points, but ultimately our perspective is better. So we can acknowledge their good points and kind of give their argument a little bit, but ultimately we can come back to that may be true, but this is how it really is, and this is why this is more important. Ultimately, we get the last word to make our argument because it's our argumentative essay. So that's the first body paragraph, your second paragraph all overall. Then also in that body, then we want to have 2 good solid paragraphs arguing our perspective, making all the good points that we brainstormed about this perspective early on. And, we want to make that point, give examples, develop it, tell the story, explain why that point is so telling and why it's so important and why it makes you believe in your perspective and why probably you think everybody else should believe what you're thinking as well. So 2 paragraphs doing our perspective, and then ultimately we need a conclusion. And the simplest way to make a conclusion is to have it mirror kind of your introduction in a certain way. A lot of people will say you restate your thesis statement. I don't know that you want to restate it in the exact same words, but that's probably the simplest way to kind of bring the argument back to where you started and let people know that we're getting done with this essay and we're ready to wrap it up. We want to give our reader a sense of closure so that they understand, hey, this thing's about done. Okay, you've made your points. I get it. It's done. We're wrapping it up now. So ultimately, that's what we want to do. You could also tell a story there. You can do all of the same things you do in the introduction, but ultimately, we just kind of want to wrap up the essay and kind of let people know, hey, I've told you what I believed and why I believe it, and I maintain that this is the thing I believe. So ultimately, 5 paragraphs minimum in this essay, and you're going to have all week to do this. You need an introduction that contains a hook and a thesis statement. Your second paragraph is going to be the opposing perspective and their arguments. You need to be fair and present it honestly. But ultimately, you can end that paragraph by refuting and explaining away some of their arguments. Your third paragraph is going to be a good, solid paragraph arguing your perspective. Fourth paragraph, another good, solid paragraph arguing your perspective. And your fifth paragraph is going to be the conclusion, wrapping it all up. If you need to add more body paragraphs, by all means do that. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. I will have the assignment available and open on Canvas, and you can submit it there. It'll be open until 11:59 p.m. on Friday night. So you will have this week to work on writing your own essay. Again, the 8 perspectives will be in Canvas, or if you're getting stuff sent home, it'll be on the flash drive with PDFs of all of that information you need to choose whichever perspective you want to write about. So with that said, I'll wrap it up and have a great week, everybody.